Thursday. Welcome to another episode of Reinvent and Rediscover, my cozy corner of the internet, where we talk all things finding yourself, discovering who you are. And this podcast is for the people on the in between, the transitional periods of life. I'm your host, Ava Laurie, and this week we're going to be tackling resentment, what resentment really is, how to actually release it with research-based facts. And this podcast topic was asked for by a friend. So we're tackling this. And I think this kind of goes off of last week's episode of anger. So if you have not listened to that episode, then I encourage you to listen to episode 50 of this podcast, all about anger. And I think resentment goes right off of that because resentment is anger manifested for a prolonged period of time, and we're going to just dive right into it. Based off my findings, I wanted to really understand what resentment is, and I kind of wanted to clock in what areas of my life am I holding any resentment towards other people's actions and other people's wrongdoings of me. Because, like I said in the last episode about anger, anger is usually sparked by the feeling of injustice from another person. So, resentment is that continual wrongdoing, and all of a sudden you feel like you are holding a grudge against this person for their actions towards you. And a lot of times I think this happens because the initial anger is not expressed, either because you did not feel safe expressing your hurt and your emotions, or because you are really the problem and you have deep insecurities or deep wounds that you have to uncover and solve because it's actually not them. It might be you. And let's talk about that. So, I did a little bit of philosophical research. Nietzsche, I feel like I'm always saying his name wrong, but he's one of my favorite philosophers of all time. I did study philosophy in college, but I have a really hard time categorizing philosophers and their overarching ideals. However, I did find some information about what Nietzsche says about resentment and what it is, so that you can also understand why you may be feeling this emotion towards another person. So, he says that resentment in the absence of a consistent theory of desire. He sometimes believes that resentment can be overcome by human efforts. So, this is to say that don't fret. You can figure out how to release resentment by like, you are capable of removing that wound and removing that emotion, because at the end of the day, resentment is kind of ruminating negative thoughts about a specific occurrence that kind of lowers your self-esteem, but it's kind of a double-edged sword in a way. And Nietzsche kind of talks about this in the way that it's self-destructive, but it's also a strengthening emotion, because resentment kind of puts you on a weird pedestal where you feel like you're kind of gaining power back from this person by feeling this intense anger towards them and this rage towards them in a way. And so that feels empowering, right? Anger is a very powerful emotion, as I've talked about in the last episode. So it makes you feel as though you are standing over them. But at the end of the day, this internalized anger leading to resentment actually keeps you stuck. And it keeps you stuck ruminating over this event and the self beliefs that were a causation of this event. And if you don't attack it, it's going to manifest in your belief on yourself, but also the way you treat other people. Either you go back to this person and you feel really revengeful and you want to figure out how to get revenge on them for what they did to you, or you will use that hurt and use it as an excuse to treat other people in the same way and have that anger kind of be a cyclical pattern in your life. And you don't want to do that. So you have to figure out how to release it. And that's okay because you can do it. And Nietzsche says that there is no experience that cannot lead to knowledge. And this was quoted in the. So Cybers wrote The Resentment and the Genealogy of Morals. So he kind of dives into Nietzsche's theories and his ideologies about resentment and morals as a whole. And what he says is the end result is self destruction, a veritable inferno of violence. So, resentment is very self destructive. It's very bad for you and it heightens your blood pressure. It causes stress. It boosts your adrenaline. It makes your heart rate go up. Whenever you think about this event and you're like constantly, beating the dead horse over it, you're sparking that angry emotion back over and over and over again, and you're allowing it to still take hold of your life and not allow you to actually move forward. Sometimes you think that you're moving forward because, oh, you're so resentful towards them, you don't speak to them anymore, they don't have a hold on you, you're so powerful, you're standing on this pedestal, but really, you're taking that resentment and you're allowing it to continue on in your life just in different ways. And that's not good. Let's figure out how to get rid of that. Um, he also talks about how resentment is reactive in the way that you end up acting against others rather than for yourself. So, in order to kind of actually release this resentment, you have to channel back inwards because resentment is such an outward focused emotion. And the way that he defines it is literally that an emotion always directed away from the self toward others. And he is hard put to explain why the culture of resentment has managed to crush those potential over men who have maintained their autonomy. So it actually takes away your autonomy when you feel this emotion because it puts your identity in this place of hurt and it victimizes you. And whether or not you realize that, because most people do not admit the victimization of self, it's basically what you are doing. Resentment gives, by its very structure, a certain degree of strength to the resentful self because it acts to muster all the self suffering around itself. Basically, what is being said here is that resentment is directed outward, but it doesn't only affect others, it really affects yourself. And it's not a freeing emotion to feel resentment. It's actually a very trapping emotion that will keep you stuck because it ends up being the comparison of yourself to others. It's a strengthening emotion and it puts yourself on kind of a pedestal in the way that it gathers all of your suffering into one focused and kind of angry identity. So it's kind of paradoxical in that way. It's reactive and active. And people are reactive when their emotions are primarily focused on others rather than themselves and their own goals. And when I say it's reactive, I'm saying that because it's totally motivated by other people other than yourself. But it does give you, the resentful person, a strength by putting your identity and your emotion all focused on resisting others rather than your own autonomy and how you can, redefine yourself and move forward. So, with that being said, I truly feel like if you are struggling with resentment, there's something that you need to work on within yourself. You struggle with your independence, you struggle with freedom, because I know anytime I have held resentment towards another person, I have struggled with my identity and my sense of self, and I've struggled with my autonomy because I'm so focused on what they're doing, how they're moving. I hope they know how much they hurt me. I hope they know that. And it's like they do know. I'm holding a place for them still in my heart because I refuse to do the internal work. So it's easier to ruminate on how they effed up than it is to think on a deeper level about why it's causing me so much hurt. And typically, it's causing me so much hurt because it redefined the way that I view myself. I now view myself as someone who was not worthy of love, or someone who deserved that bad treatment. Or I'm now viewing myself as an interpretation of their actions rather than the action itself. A lot of people do things from a hurt place, and I'm not here to tell you that forgiveness is the answer and being more compassionate, because upon my research, there was kind of some mixed opinions about how to get through resentment, and a lot of people were saying that you need to find more compassion for other people and a greater sense of forgiveness in order to forgive their actions so that you can feel a release. But I mean, that may be the case in a small sense, but at the end of the day, I don't want to excuse their behavior. So, kind of finding that in between of I'm not excusing their behavior, but I'm letting it actually go, and I'm not allowing it to have a hold on my life. There were times in my life where I let someone who treated me very, very, very badly affect my self-worth and my identity, and it stripped me of who I was because now I was victim to their effed up behavior. And while I can sit here and psychoanalyze why they acted that way and why they did that to me and how their childhood and their upbringing and the other people who wronged them or abused them or treated them poorly, how all of that manifested into the way they hurt me. But you know what? They did that because they felt a lasting resentment from wrongdoings upon them. And they used that to fold it into me to feel better about themselves and to release resentment disguised as such. They were disguising and excusing their behavior by the fact that they feel better because they released resentment from other people by causing it on someone else. So I'm not going to sit here and psychoanalyze someone else's behavior because it's honestly a waste of my time. I am not in their head. And while I have known people very well who have caused me harm, I don't want to excuse their behavior. Any reason why I forgive anyone in my life is for my benefit. And that's the importance of forgiveness. I think we talk about forgiveness all the time and how important it is to forgive and forgive people and be compassionate. And that's true. That is true. But keep in mind that all of that compassion and forgiveness is really for yourself. It's really like closing that chapter and having the closure that you will not receive from their ends, but creating it within yourself. Um, so, anywho, let's talk about that a little bit more. If you are so bound by others and caught up by others, and you are seeing their actions as a reflection of your value and or self-worth, that is how you know you're resentful. I have struggled with this in the past as well, where I have been so caught up in, oh, they treated me like crap because I'm not worth a crap. That's not true. And if you rewire the way your brain is thinking and the way that you view yourself, and you stand on business and you stand on a level of self-worth and confidence, and that transmits, then you can rise above the wrongdoings of other people. Another reason like feeling resentment can be so dangerous is because it's comforting. Like I said, it keeps you stuck. So whenever you're stuck and stagnant in an emotion, it becomes comforting. That's like why they say that depression becomes addicting, because it becomes a familiar emotion. And even though it's negative, it's hard to distinguish the two. When it's comfortable, it's easy to remain in that state and that feeling rather than do the work to change it and go into the unknown feeling and go on the other side. Um, Keep in mind that when you're at a point of resentment, there's kind of no resolving it in a way, because nothing that person does will change the event and what happened. There's only a way to release it. And that's why they say within, I heard about this study or whatever they did on um, marriages and the likelihood of divorce, and the one emotion that they were able to spot between everyone who was got divorced or whatever was feelings of resentment, because the marriage could not move past the resentment because it was deep enough to the point where it could not be resolved between them two, but rather on an individual basis. Resentment puts the control of your pain at the responsibility of someone else, and that kind of makes you think that you have found freedom from your anger, but that anger is actually harnessed deep within you. And it's important that you don't go about life ignoring that and acting like it's not the case. You have to dig deeper within yourself and kind of put the responsibility of your feelings less on this person that you're holding this grudge on, because at this point, it's less about them and it's more about you, why you were triggered, why you're holding on to it, you know, how you have defined yourself through their actions. And something I found on how to kind of go back in this specific event and release it is there's supposedly a method that's been researched through. Uh-oh. I thought I just messed up my recording. There's a method that's been researched by psychologists from UC Berkeley and the University of Michigan, which is called distancing, which essentially you take yourself out of the equation. You pretend you're a fly on the wall, or, an outside perspective viewing the event that occurred, and just witness it. Leave your interpretations out of the event and focus on facts and what actually happened during this time. And this will allow you to kind of regain perspective from an objective point of view and view the event for what it is at face value instead of through your lens of biases. So, with that being said, it will bring up some questions for you. Like, what have you been allowing? What boundaries might you need to set moving forward? Are you able to kind of self reflect about what you are enabling? Has people pleasing tendencies been a problem for you and caused you to put up with mistreatments? Sometimes I think about this like this. Like in my past relationship, for example, I'm gonna talk about like hypothetical, okay? Like this is a hypothetical situation. Let's say that my ex always flirted with other girls, but to me, he always justified it and explained it away, whatever. And I allowed it because I trusted him. And then at one point, I found out he cheated on me. And now I feel like scum of the earth. I feel unworthy. I feel a great deal of resentment towards him. Okay, so now if we use self-distancing, I'm going to go back in this scenario from an outside perspective, and I'm going to think about if I were my best friend, like if I were her and I'm witnessing me go through constant disrespect by my ex, what am I, as the friend, gonna tell me? Okay, I might be losing you a bit, but what would your best friend tell you about it during that time? She's probably going to look at you and be like, stop enabling that behavior. You feel that anger right there? You need to express that and put up boundaries and move forward, or you need to let him go before it leads to resentment. Okay? So, this method allows you to go back in and think about an outside perspective and view the situation much more objectively. Okay? Like my friend would tell me in that circumstance, you are putting up with mistreatment and bad behavior, and if this carries on, something either worse is going to happen or you're just going to end up resenting him and you're going to like allow that to fester inside of you and be a further problem in the future. Okay? That's something my friend would tell me. So I can use that lens and that perspective to kind of regain focus on the situation and think about kind of my responsibility in this situation because I can't change his actions. Okay? I cannot change my ex's actions and I don't need to psychoanalyze it. Okay? That's his problem. At the end of the day, that's his problem. What's my problem is my behavior, my lack of boundaries, and my lack of self worth to actually not enable this. Does that make sense? So, releasing resentment means I'm going back, I'm trying the self distancing method here, and I'm using the principles that I learned in order to move forward and not feel so victim to the scenario because that victim mentality is going to keep you stuck and ruminating, as I said. And while you're doing this, like I said, when Nietzsche said there is no experience that cannot lead to knowledge, so now you have the tools to not allow this resentment to be a cyclical pattern in your future relationships. And they found that this was actually helpful and allowed their subjects to take themselves out of the equation a bit and remove their feelings and new sense of negative identity from the situation, allowed them to actually assess and take that knowledge and the things that they learned to apply moving forward. Hopefully that is helpful to you because that was kind of like an aha moment of how many times did I allow this person to kind of gaslight me and flirt with other women? Like I knew better. I knew better, but then when it came down to it and they started justifying it because whatever reason they did, I allowed that to define my worth. And I allowed that to kind of keep knocking me down and bringing me lower to the point where enabling and enabling. And then all of a sudden I got cheated on. And no, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying because you enabled stuff for so long that it's your fault it happened to you. That is not the case. It is not your fault that somebody else treated you really wrong. But what I am saying is that you can use that experience to reframe the way you view things. Because when you find places of responsibility, that is strengthening. It is strengthening to know that you have more power and more autonomy than you have given yourself credit for in the past, because you do have a lot more power over situations, and that feels helpful. Because the helplessness that you feel with resentment can be solved by finding the power and the autonomy that you have in situations and with people moving forward. So this will allow you to kind of shift your focus from being so reactive with your emotions and more so see things through the lens of problem solving and action based rather than just reactive. Okay? The more that you put up with, the more that you are lowering your self esteem, and whether or not you realize that on the conscious level, that is the truth. Resentment ends up calling for the punishment and the prevention of injustice, and both of those are actions that you can take. You end up punishing yourself as a cycle of resentment because you feel like helpless. You feel helpless in the situation. You feel like there's nothing that you can do, and there's not enough of a punishment to them to justify their wrongdoings towards you. So, moving forward, you figure out how to kind of prevent these injustices from occurring again and again, which Butler talks about in the 15 sermons preached at the Rolls Chapel. And he also talks about forgiveness, like I said back in the beginning of the episode, which it can end up being an excusing action in order to make you feel better, but it's not actually getting to the core of rewiring the way that your brain views the event that occurred. You have to reconfigure these neural pathways in order to change the belief about yourself that was created in that event. And the more that you ruminate over it, the more that you are solidifying these beliefs about yourself. So you have to go back in, and every time you ruminate on this event, you have to change the way you think about it. Because what you tell yourself, you will believe. And what you tell yourself over and over and over, you will believe. I read another book about this the other day. I can't remember what it was called, but there is science behind these neural pathways of yours being reinforced by the thoughts and the things that you tell yourself over and over. So it's really important that you change the way that you speak to yourself about events. Okay? Okay. Um, Releasing this resentment is a way to reclaim yourself and your emotions. So this call to action leaves you with a few questions of what resentment is doing for you. And this is where I get into your 3 options of how to actually deal with resentment and how to actually release it. Because I've kind of gotten to that point a little bit throughout this episode, but I want to narrow it in to make this very tangible for you and very action driven. Okay. So there's a couple things that holding on to this resentment may be filling for you and may be doing for you. It's either boosting your ego to feel resentment towards them because it feels powerful. It feels like you have a hold on them. It feels like you have a one up on them. So it's either boosting your ego or it's making you feel safe by this victim mentality that I spoke about and ruminating in this sadness. Or 3, it is showing you where you need to stand firm in your boundaries. So when you ask yourself the question of what is this resentment doing for you, it could be, 1 or 2 of these options. It could be all 3. I don't know, but you need to analyze what holding on to this is doing for you, because it's doing something, or you wouldn't be holding on to the resentment. Okay? So this leaves you with 3 options in order of how they feel. So if it's boosting your ego, you likely need to work on your self-esteem because resentment is leading to boosting your ego. So you need to figure out how to validate yourself and work on that self-esteem so that it's not fueled by other people. Because when your value is at the expense of other people, it's going to constantly be fluctuating. And you don't want to have a fluctuating self view. You want to have a firm view on yourself and be confident and trust who you are. So don't leave it up to other people. Work on that and clock it. Number 2, if resentment is making you feel safe by that like victimization of yourself, then perhaps you need to feel your emotions more fully, because maybe you have never had the safe space to feel sadness or feel the hurt in the past. So if you are ruminating on those thoughts, maybe it's because you have not felt the emotions all the way through enough to actually let it the F go. If you have been someone whose emotions have always been dismissed, then perhaps you have never had the safe space to actually feel authentically the way that you feel. And you've always felt shut down and whatever. So maybe you need to create a safe space within yourself to actually feel things out and acknowledge the sadness, acknowledge the hurt, because it doesn't make you less of a person to feel sad by other people. It's normal. And I think a lot of people grew up in households where their feelings were often dismissed, mocked, or just passed off. And growing up and being done wrong to, you have to figure out how to actually feel the emotions. The only way out of them is through them. You have to sit in the sadness. You have to sit in the anger. You have to sit in the hurt and the pain to come through them. Or you will always ruminate on them because it's your way of feeling and releasing that emotion in microdoses, but it's going to keep you stuck in it because it's going to keep getting triggered and bringing you back to it. What you need to do is go through the process of feeling it fully and allow it to pass through you in a full way. The best way is not to just distract yourself, shut it off, avoid it, because that avoidance of your emotion is leading to resentment, and it's pulling you through your life, and it's got you by a grip. And now you're like a little puppet to your emotions. Sit in your emotions. Third thing, your resentment may be showing you where you need to stand firmer on your boundaries. So this leaves you with the option of sharpening your sense of self and your values. There are times where I resented someone for crossing boundaries of mine that I didn't place firm enough. My boundaries were not firm enough, and I allowed them to be justified, to be bust through, because I was not firm enough in myself and my belief of self and my values enough to hold them still enough to not be done wrong. So perhaps you need to think deeper about what your boundaries are and what people are not allowed to cross. Because the more that you enable that, the more you are going to feel resentful from multiple people in your life, and you're going to constantly feel like people are doing you wrong, but you're not expressing your boundaries and they are not firm enough because you have a wavering sense of self. So clock that too. What is your resentment feeling, and how do you need to adjust accordingly? Because resentment, at the end of the day, the power falls in your hands and how you can do something about it, because you're likely never going to get closure from that person, or you're never going to feel like they can justify it, because at the end of the day, now it's festered within you and you have to deal with it because you are holding that piece of them. You are keeping yourself stuck. You are keeping yourself in the past. And as soon as you take your power back, it makes it a lot easier to figure out how to release the resentment and actually move forward. Okay? All right. Well, I hope the final three options really made this tangible for you in understanding your resentment and what actions you can actually take moving forward. And like I said, I just want to remind you that you weren't deserving of wrongdoing. You didn't deserve mistreatment. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just trying to empower you and help you find your power back in situations where you lost your power. Because you have the power at the end of the day to come out and grow and learn more. And there's science behind this stuff that I'm saying. There's evidence, there's research, whatever. So if that's what you needed to hear, I hope you heard it, and I hope you took these tools. And if you know someone in your personal life who may need these tools, or need to hear about it, whatever, like, comment, share to those people, follow along this podcast. And until then, I'll see you in the next episode. Live passionately. Bye.